The boardroom on Bay Street smelled like leather and something colder. The particular stillness of rooms where decisions get made without mercy. Helena Norris had been to this floor 100 times before, back when she and Ross Mackenzie were building something together, back when his name on the directory made her feel proud instead of hollowed out. She sat across from his lawyers now, 3 of them, suits pressed, faces arranged into careful neutrality. Ross himself leaned back in his chair by the window, overlooking the gray sprawl of Toronto in October. He hadn't looked at her once since she walked in. Joy Adeyemi, Helena's lawyer and oldest friend, placed the final papers on the table. You only need to sign the last page. Helena picked up the pen. Her hands were steadier than she expected. 7 months pregnant, wearing a wool coat that barely closed over her belly, she pressed the tip to the paper and thought, "This is the last thing I will ever do for him." Ross checked his phone. The signature came out smaller than she intended. She set the pen down and watched the ink dry, and thought it looked like an apology she hadn't written. Outside, rain moved across the CN Tower in gray sheets. "We appreciate your cooperation," one of the lawyers said, already gathering the pages. Ross stood. He buttoned his jacket without looking up and said, "I'll have my assistant arrange the rest of your things from the condo." That was all. No eye contact. No pause. He walked out like she was a meeting that had run long. Joy waited until the door closed. "Come on, we're done here." But Helena sat another moment. She pressed her palm flat against her belly, felt a soft kick, and thought, "You are the only good thing that came from any of this." Outside, the rain had thinned to drizzle. She stood on Bay Street in her winter coat, signed divorce papers tucked into her bag, and let the cold air move through her. She didn't cry. Not there on that sidewalk, with strangers in raincoats moving past. She saved it for the subway. The St. Andrew platform was nearly empty. She sat on a bench and cried quietly, hands over her face, until the next train came. 3 weeks later, Ross Mackenzie married Portia Banks in Muskoka. Helena found out through Instagram, the way people find out everything awful now. She was eating soup in her sublet in Leslieville, a 1-bedroom with a leaking radiator and a view of the laundromat across the street, when her phone lit up with a notification. A mutual friend had shared a post. Ross in linen, Portia in white silk, autumn light catching her blonde hair. The caption read, "And so it begins." Helena put her phone face down on the table and finished her soup. Portia Banks had 90,000 Instagram followers and a lifestyle blog that had been featured in Toronto Life. She posted flat lays of avocado toast and ski weekends in Whistler. She was 26. Helena had met her exactly once, at a charity dinner the previous February, and had thought she seemed restless, a little too interested in where Ross was at all times. She hadn't let herself think about it until the papers were signed. Joy came over that evening with Thai food and her calm, practical energy. She set takeout containers on the kitchen table and looked at Helena directly. "You need to stay off social media for the next while." "Already done," Helena said. "Good." Joy poured 2 glasses of wine, then looked at Helena's belly and poured the second one back. "How are you feeling, physically?" "Like I'm carrying a bowling ball and my ribs have permanently relocated." "That tracks." Joy opened the curry. "Ross's lawyers called mine today. He's proposing $300 a month in child support, effective after the birth." Helena looked up. $300. "I know. His last quarterly bonus was 4 times my annual salary." "Helena, I know." Joy kept her voice even. "He's lowballing you now so he can renegotiate later. We won't let him, but it'll take a few weeks to get the motion filed. In the meantime, I have $400 left in my checking account and a hydro bill I haven't opened." Joy nodded slowly. "Then we fight faster." The next morning, Helena walked to the prenatal clinic on Queen Street East. Warm waiting room, hand sanitizer smell, institutional vanilla air freshener. She took a number. When the sonographer pressed the transducer against her belly, Helena stared at the ceiling and breathed. The sonographer's voice shifted slightly. "Has anyone spoken to you about the possibility of a multiple pregnancy?" Helena turned her head. "What?" "There are two heartbeats, very clear. You're carrying twins." The room tilted. Helena gripped the edge of the table and tried to find the walls. Two children. 2 car seats, 2 cribs, 2 sets of everything. 2 people who would need her completely, when she wasn't even sure she could hold herself together at the seams. She pressed her fingertips to her collarbone and breathed until the ceiling stopped moving. Are they healthy? They look strong, the sonographer said gently. But twins are high risk. You'll need close monitoring. And Ms. Norris, your blood pressure is already elevated. You need rest. Helena walked out of the clinic into the October cold. She stood at the streetcar stop and called Joy. Twins, she said when Joy picked up. A long silence. Then okay, I'm coming to you. They spent the evening recalibrating. Joy recalculated the support claim. Helena called her mother in Sudbury, who went quiet for 3 seconds and then said, Well, we'll figure it out. I'll drive down next weekend. That was all. No drama. Helena's mother had never been a woman who dealt in drama. It was the most grounding thing she could have said. What Helena didn't tell Joy, didn't tell anyone, was that she had started writing in a notebook, small reminders to herself. You have done harder things than this. You built that firm from 3 clients and a second-hand drafting table. You can build this too. Then, in mid-November, a courier arrived with an envelope bearing Ross's law firm letterhead. She knew before she opened it. Confidentiality and settlement agreement. She read it standing at the kitchen counter in her housecoat. Ross was offering a lump sum, enough for 4 months of rent, in exchange for her complete silence about the marriage, the divorce, and the pregnancy. She was never to speak publicly about Ross Mackenzie in any way that could affect his professional reputation. At the bottom, a line waited for her name. She read it twice. Then she folded it, walked to the recycling bin under the sink, and dropped it in. She called Joy. He sent the NDA, Helena said. How much? Not enough. Don't sign it. I already threw it away. A pause. Then Joy laughed. Not a happy laugh, but an honest one. Good. Let me tell you what we're going to do. They filed the motion 2 days later, full support for both children, Ross's documented income over 3 years, a bad faith clause in the original separation agreement. Within 48 hours, Ross's lawyer called Joy directly. That evening, Ross called Helena. She almost didn't answer, then she did. You're making this very difficult, he said. I'm making it accurate, she said. Those are your children. You don't get to offer me 4 months of rent and a silence clause and call it done. You're not going to get what you think you're getting out of this. I'm not getting anything except what's fair, Ross. He hung up. Helena set her phone on the counter and stood in the kitchen a long time. Then she picked up her notebook and wrote, He's scared. Scared people bluff. Don't confuse noise with power. She went to bed. It was mid-December, 2 weeks before her due date, when it happened. She'd been working from home, editing proposals for an urban design consultancy that had kept her on contract, when the Braxton Hicks contractions she'd been having for weeks changed. Closer together. Sharper. By 11 at night she was timing them on her phone, and they were 8 minutes apart. She texted Joy. Joy said to go in. She was pulling on her coat in the hallway when the door buzzer went. She wasn't expecting anyone. She pressed the intercom. Helena Norris? A man's voice, quiet and steady. My name is Nathaniel Cross. I'm in 4B. The building desk gave me your unit number. I know that sounds strange. Your friend Joy called because she couldn't reach you and she was worried. She's stuck in a deposition in Mississauga. Helena blinked. Joy called the building desk. Yes, I have ID if you want me to slide it under the door. She opened the door. Nathaniel Cross was tall, dark-coated, maybe mid-40s. He had the kind of face that had been good-looking longer than it expected to be, with gray at his temples and something measured in his expression. He held out his wallet without being asked. You're in labor, he said, looking at her coat and the bag on her shoulder. Early stage, probably. My car is downstairs. St. Michael's is 15 minutes. He said it the way someone says the meeting starts at 9, not unkindly, just as a fact. Helena grabbed her bag. In the car, he didn't ask questions. He drove and she breathed through contractions, and the city moved past in strings of December lights. When they stopped at a red on King Street, he said, First pregnancy? Twins, she said. He nodded and changed lanes. At the hospital, he walked her to triage. When the intake nurse asked if he was her husband, he opened his mouth and Helena said, "He's a neighbor, he drove me." She looked at him. "You don't have to stay." "I know," he said. He stayed. The twins were born at 4:19 in the morning, a girl and a boy, both strong, both loud. Helena cried when they placed her daughter in her arms, and cried again when they brought her son. The NICU nurse said they were small but breathing well on their own. When she was moved to recovery, Nathaniel was still in the waiting room, with 2 coffees from the Tim Hortons downstairs, and the slightly undone look of someone who had not slept but was not going to admit it. "You're still here," she said. "Joy's flight lands at 6. He handed her the coffee. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and offered a card. "Nathaniel Cross, the Cross Foundation, in case you need anything practical." She knew that name. The Cross Foundation ran after-school programs in 15 Ontario cities and had built 3 community health centers in the north. She had written a proposal for one of their library partnerships 2 years ago. She had not connected it to the quiet man in 4B, who apparently checked on strangers in labor at midnight. "Why do you live in that building?" she asked. Something shifted in his face. "I grew up in that neighborhood. My mother's house was 2 blocks over." A pause. "I like being close to something real." She thought about that later, while her daughter slept in the bassinet beside her, and her son was monitored in the next bay, and the hospital hummed its fluorescent hum around her. Something real. She hadn't had anything real in so long she'd forgotten what it felt like. She named her daughter Thea. She named her son Finn. She said both names in the dark of the Leslieville apartment, in February, while the radiator knocked and both babies slept. Then Ross filed for shared custody. Helena read the filing in Joy's office. Felix, Finn, strapped to her chest in a carrier and Thea asleep in the car seat beside her. She read it once, then she set it down. "He's never met them," she said. "I know." He didn't acknowledge the birth. He sent a form letter through his lawyer. "I know. He's doing this because his company is going public in the spring. He wants to look like a family man for investors." Helena was quiet for a moment. "Then let's show the court what kind of family man he actually is." The hearing was held on a Tuesday in March. Ross arrived with 2 lawyers and a new haircut. He smiled at the judge the way he always smiled at rooms, like he expected to be liked. Joy's first witness was Helena's OB, who confirmed Ross had attended none of the prenatal appointments, despite being notified of each one. Her second witness was Ross's former executive assistant, who testified that she had been asked to block Helena's calls from his work line beginning in September. Then Joy played an audio clip, a voicemail Ross had left on Helena's phone in November, the night she'd called to tell him about the twins. "I've moved on, Helena. I don't know what you expect me to do with this. These aren't my concern right now. Please stop calling my office." The courtroom went still. Ross's lawyer started to object. The judge looked over her glasses and said, "Sit down, counsel." Helena didn't look at Ross. She kept her eyes on the judge. "Mr. Mackenzie," the judge said, "the court finds your petition for shared custody without merit at this time. Primary custody will remain with the mother. Child support will be recalculated effective immediately at the full table amount based on your disclosed income." Outside the courthouse on University Avenue, the March wind was brutal. Joy pulled her scarf up and said, "That's the end of it." Helena shifted Finn against her shoulder. Nathaniel was waiting at the bottom of the steps with the car. He stood by the open door with his hands in his coat pockets, not trying to look like he wasn't watching to make sure she was all right. She was all right. By May, something between them had moved in a direction neither of them had named. He came for dinner twice a week. He had learned how to set up the bouncy seat, and which formula agreed with Thea's stomach, and how to hold Finn at the right angle to avoid the reflux. These were small things. They were not nothing. One evening, after the babies were down, they sat on the back porch with tea and the last of the spring light. He said quietly, "I want to be around. I know you haven't asked me to be. I'm not asking you for anything. I just want you to know I mean it." She looked at him for a moment. "I spent 3 years making myself smaller so Ross could feel larger. I'm not going to do that again. I wouldn't want you to. I know. She held her mug with both hands. That's the thing. I actually know that about you. They married the following spring in the garden of his family's house in the Beaches, on a Thursday afternoon. Joy stood beside Helena. Nathaniel's sister, who had become one of the warmest people Helena had ever known, stood on the other side. The twins were in matching linen and fell asleep on a blanket in the shade halfway through the ceremony. The officiant read one short poem. They exchanged rings that were plain and white gold and didn't need to perform anything. That evening, after everyone had gone, Helena stood in the garden and looked up at the Toronto sky, which is never fully dark, always faintly orange from the light that never quite goes out. She thought of the Bay Street boardroom in October, the pen, the rain, the woman she had been on that St. Andrew platform, crying quietly so no one would see. She hadn't known then that the worst thing that had ever happened to her was also the beginning. A year after the hearing, Ross Mackenzie's company went public and immediately encountered a regulatory investigation into misrepresented investor disclosures. 3 board members resigned. Portia quietly ended the relationship, moved to Vancouver, and relaunched her blog under a different name. Ross issued a public statement in which he referred to himself in the third person, which Helena's mother found genuinely deeply funny. The tabloids wanted a comment from Helena. She gave them nothing. Not because she was protecting him. She had already given Joy everything, and Joy had already given it to the right people. But because there was simply nothing left, she wanted to say to anyone about Ross Mackenzie. On the twins' first birthday, Nathaniel built a tower of blocks on the living room floor, and Finn knocked it down 6 times while Thea watched with the focused expression of someone taking careful notes. Helena sat cross-legged on the rug, watching her children, and felt something she had no dramatic name for. It wasn't triumph. It wasn't relief. It was smaller and more durable than both. It was just this, the radiator that no longer leaked, the city outside the window going about its long and indifferent business, Joy arriving late with a bag of Timbits and an apology, Nathaniel's hand warm on her shoulder. Thea looked up at her from the carpet, wide-eyed and wondering, and Helena thought, I kept my promise, I held on, I'm here. She was here, and it was enough, and it was more than enough, and finally, for the first time in longer than she could clearly remember, it was hers.